Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this video, we're looking at the new upgraded FabFilter Pro R2, or R squared as it appears to be here. That's amusing. It's not to say that I haven't done similar sorts of things myself in the presentation. Now, we're going to look at two things. Obviously, we're going to walk through the product and have a look at it, but so much of that's been done elsewhere. We're also going to look at a couple of questions, which are along the lines of, what's a Pro Reverb? And the marrying question is, should we only use good reverbs? Because I think there's a fair amount of damage done in Dorville and the resultant music that people are trying to make, because they get this mistaken impression about what a reverb is supposed to be or what tools are supposed to be, and that some are good and some are bad. Some obviously are better than others, but that doesn't make them right for you. And it's really important to understand, when looking at any tool, does it suit what I'm doing? Or have I merely believed what somebody told me, whether it's the marketing people or some idiot in a group or forum who is obsessed with trying to be Taylor Swift or Ed Sheepman or drunk or whoever it is that they're trying to emulate this week, because that's a losing proposition. You can't be that, nor do you want to be that, because you're an indie. You have to be unique. That doesn't mean you can't be reminiscent of, but as long as you are chasing somebody else, then you can only ever lose. We'll start with, well, what are the update features? We'll run through those and we will look at the device then as a whole. So the first big one that I've seen around places is Dolby Atmos multi-channel kind of thing. I'm not going to touch that because I don't do that kind of work, nor do I actually think that, unless you're in film and TV, that it's particularly relevant. There have been so many attempts to make quad or various versions of multi-channel audio for music, and they have never gone anywhere, nor do I think the Dolby Atmos in particular will either. So no interest to me, therefore I have no right to an opinion on it one way or another. We do have two more shapes in here, rather than just the one reverb type shape. There are now two more. The vintage and plate shapes have come in. They are different from each other, so fair enough. They say that they have re-knobbed everything to make it non-tech. They've added a decay tuning, so you've got like an EQ curve which affects the internal feedback loop. So it changes how the frequencies within that reverb happen over time, rather than just being a static EQ curve, which they do have. The ability to import, well, they say impulse responses. In reality, you can import any kind of wave file. That's a little bit interesting, and this auto gate thing. We'll move straight to having a look at FabFilter and the price of the device. It's never been a cheap product. FabFilters have never been cheap products. They have some cheapies, the cut-down versions and what have you. People will be like, but it's too expensive, man. And it's like, well, how committed are you to your product, your cause? You can't build a proper Formula One car without spending $1 million, or whatever it is that you have to spend. You can't build a proper Formula One car that stands a chance on the track if you're only going to, download free stuff, because you're going to get broken carburetors or whatever it is they use to pump petrol into these things. So you've got to invest if you intend to be serious about your things. But at the same time, we're going to look and see, do we have to? Yes, if you want to go down a certain path. No, if you don't. At $169 US, then I think it's very fair if this is the right path for you. I'm very open about FabFilter. I'm not a massive personal fan. I have nothing against them. I think they do very good work on a whole. It just doesn't necessarily fit my vision, and that's a personal thing. So for those people who've tried to be like, you're not allowed to make a video where you don't love FabFilter, it's just like, well, I bet you are very, very open about your own personal opinions about things when it suits you to be. So if you're allowed to say, I don't like whoever, then everyone else is allowed to say that. This is a review. It's a personal opinion service, as well as presenting certain facts about things through the bias that is Benedict. That's the way the world works. I'm very open about that, but I have a lot of respect for the products that they put down, regardless of the fact that I don't actually use them. Along those lines, yes, thank you, FabFilter. They have provided the copy that we are going to see. It does not in any way influence my reviews, my opinions, my anything. Yes, I work for hire, but I don't work for the companies that I review, even if they approach me directly. In terms of an upgrade price, I couldn't find one. Everywhere seems to say just log in to see. So maybe you get different upgrade pricing based on, but if you're already on the FabFilter train, especially on the FabFilter R, then you've probably already got an email, in which case you don't need that answer from me. We're going to do things a little differently this time. I'm going to move to my good and bad, then we're going to start to get into the bulk of the program. So in terms of what I think is good and bad, and we'll discuss those as we go through, is that I actually really like that there is no sort of AI BS around this. It's not pretending to automatically do your mixing for you. If you want my opinion or my view on those sorts of things, I just looked at an automated EQ thing that promised to make everything sound better. I thought it balked my track. I thought it made my track way worse. I was very pleased with the music exactly how I chose to make it as art. I thought it undid everything that I did. So the fact that FabFilter are deliberately staying out of this whole we'll do it for you kind of thing, I think is actually a very positive thing, because it's far more pro, it's far more professional to be doing things yourself. Somebody who hands things off to somebody else, they might be a delegator, but they might also not be a professional. You know, if you hired Leonardo da Vinci to paint your grandma, and then you come in and you find that he's got like 27.5 of Freddy's actually doing the painting, you might be like, Leonardo, WTF, why am I paying you a pile of money when you're using like $1 a year 5 of Freddy's? Pro means you're really engaging with it as art. It sounds fine. It is smooth. If you define a Pro Reverb as one that's incredibly smooth, then yeah, we're on a winner here. There are other reverbs that do sound very smooth, like Valhalla stuff is diffused at the diffuser. But this is a little different from that. They are so diffused at the diffuser that they become quite characterful, false, fake in their own way. That amuses me. I don't use them, but it amuses me because it's so out there. This is more natural in that strange way that reverb units are not really that natural. But it sounds very fine and very smooth. So if that's how you're defining what should make a good reverb unit, hell yes. The wave import thing, they're calling it IR import, that is really interesting. It's probably as close as they openly go to the, oh, we'll do something for you, but I'm far more interested in that than them meddling around with using convolution, so IRs. So they've come up with a very great way of dealing with the IR thing while still being algorithmic. Big win on that one from me. The bads, because you're going to be like, well, Benedict, why aren't you in love with it? Well, I find the particularly new controls in R2 to be fudgy. We'll discuss that as we get to them. Fudgy being they don't really represent what they're doing very well. They're sort of, we'll turn this knob and have to try to work out what it's doing, but never really know. Some people are seeing that as a real positive. It's like, oh, well, it's non-technical. But building a space, obviously, if you're trying to mimic the real world in any way, shape, or form, you know, create the illusion of something, then you have to work out how it's actually creating the four walls, the prison bed, and the wash basin. Sorry, Cold Chisel song. And this doesn't really do that. Maybe over time you'll come to a great understanding, but it doesn't. Personally, I do find it overly graphical. I think that it looks very pretty, but that's the FabFilter thing, and I don't love the over-graphicalness. Something that I did realise when coming back to it, during a session, you've got this A-B, so you can compare an A state to a B state. Okay, cool. Not a thing you use a lot, but because this doesn't actually give you the ability to bypass one of these EQ curves, or possibly both of them, then you have to use the A-B state thing to be able to do that, which probably means it's not a direct A-B anyway. When you reopen the project, then it's dumped that. And you might go, but I have some other devices that I use which deliberately use the A-B state. One of them actually lets you morph between the A and B state. And I just think that's a missed opportunity. Equally, I kind of wonder, well, FabFilter have all this technology, watch the Volcano review, or even the Twin review where they've got all this LFOE and this, that, and the other stuff. And in many ways, that does not belong on a reverb. I know there's a bit of a current fad on having reverbs that leap around. But it's not good practice. It's a novelty, and there's nothing to stop you probably from doing this with this, but I'm a little surprised they didn't build that engine in, even though, as I say, it makes little sense. Just sort of think, well, yeah, okay, but again, in terms of what this is primarily designed to be, which is a high-quality set of spaces that's pretty versatile in its own way, then, yeah, those things would be a distraction. So it's a personal choice as to whether you think that they should or shouldn't have been there in the first place. Now, I'm going to attack the question of what is a pro reverb? What is a good reverb? What's the reverb you should be using to make proper Grammy-winning songs? I'm not going to answer that, but I'm going to run through a couple of things. We have got a synthesizer here, which is going through a reverb. So, synthy brass sound, but absolutely nothing's been done to make it seem more than a very flat synth sound. So we've got only the reverb to excite us with it. I've got the default Pro-R2, the default RV7000, which is the stock reverb unit in Reason, which I actually don't use. The stock with a tiny little bit of modification from Tal Reverb 4, which I've reviewed, and the default reverb patch that's in Hertz Multiplier, which was never designed to be a reverb, let alone compare to anything like this, but I do use it for reverb duties quite a bit. Not necessarily on its own, often combined with something else. So as I've shown in other videos, if you combine Hertz delay and this together, you can end up with quite a rich, unique sound, but I've just used the one to keep in sort of context of what I'm doing. So we've got this. That's RV7000, the blue one. Now, forgive yourself if you don't hear any difference. The difference is subtle. It's very subtle. There's a tiny bit more richness in the FabFilter. The RV7000's a little flat. This was considered an incredibly good reverb unit when it came out. It does predate the FabFilter, but it is fine of that style of reverb. If you listen to the very end of the tail, you will hear a little bit of difference. It's just a little smoother on the FabFilter, and that's what people tend to obsess about, how smooth and artifactless a reverb is. So if that's your definition of what's good and pro, yep, okay, Pro 2 is winning here. Let's listen to FabFilter Tal. Again, on the surface, there's not as much difference. This is clearly longer, but that's the default patch, and I kept it as close as I could. I mostly just changed balance, like the wet-dry level, to give them seemingly the same. But in terms of lushness and what have you, similar. It does become a little bit more artificial sounding on the end, but it's also running a little bit longer. But surprisingly workable. And then Pro 2 Multiplier. You can hear the taps. But particularly compared to RV7000 and even personally compared to the Pro-R2. The multiplier to me is richer and more exciting. That is a personal preference, which is why I don't use RV7000, and where I actually demoed Pro-R1, I didn't fall in love with it. It's sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, it is good at what it does, but it's not my thing. So that's why I never picked it up in the first place, because I'm much more of a this kind of a guy than a this kind of a guy. I just like that kind of thing. Now we'll pick up, here's some drums that I made earlier. They're Goran Groove's Studio Legend. As you'll see, I've pulled everything way back except for the snare. So we get a drum mix unlike what most people would make. This is it going through Pro 2. Nice and smooth. Through RV7000. Apart from shape, there's very little difference. Tal. Probably a little long and sweepy, but that's to do with the algorithm. A little diffusey for my liking, but that's the argument I have against these kinds of things as well. And then multiplier. As you heard before, it's very, very rattly. Obviously harder to do this kind of drum mix with such a sparse space. So it's understandable that people would have, as they started to do that kind of stuff in the 80s, or they started doing that stuff in the 80s because of the early digital reverbs that suddenly were a lot more smooth, but not as smooth as this, then they would move away from the more analog or bucket brigade-based reverb type things, which were rattly. But I like the rattly. So it becomes very much a personal preference. So again, to answer that broader question, which one's more pro, which one is the better one, then I'm going to say none of them. They're all suited very well to a great purpose. Personally, I find that very diffuse, clatterly, rattly sort of reverb that I use works superbly in the kind of synthesizer music that I do, and with clients, the kind of mixing that I do. I don't think I've ever used multiplier in a client mix just on its own like that, but I have used similar sorts of things across plenty of client work, and they come back and they say, wow, it feels so rich, so organic. It's like, yeah. And it sounds different because it's not the same sound as so many other people are using. We've got to be very careful about having that same formula sound. If we think in terms of formula sound, people accused that of becoming a common problem through particularly the mid-80s, and some acts fell for it. But if you think of Doobie Brothers of that time, the Michael McDonald Doobie Brothers, the Eagles, they were more solo acts at that time, Donna Henley, Glenn Fry, Little River Band, Air Supply, the Bee Gees, who were doing very middle-of-the-road kind of stuff then, their post-disco phase. While there's something similar about all of that, they're very distinct from each other. So just be cautious if you're thinking, well, I'll use the pro one because it's the good one. That way I will sound right. You've got to be very careful, because those acts that I mentioned, they were using top mix engineers, artists, not hacks, not Fiverr Freddies. They may have had some people to do some work for them, the scut work, the tape-op work, but the real mixing work was being done by a Bob Clearmountain himself. And this is truly important. And it wasn't about the gear, it was about of Bob Clearmountain or whoever was doing the mixing. Righto, so hopefully that dispels this myth about pro or good or best or rightest or whatever. Now we dig through into the walkthrough of the product. So we've got our drum loop. And here's one I prepared earlier. As I said, I would like to be able to A/B, so I can quickly show you between what I done and the default patch, but I can't. Just a little bit of an annoyance. If we do want to bypass, then it's here. Seems slightly funny down here, but they have their control panel, their ins and outs down here. So it makes sense, it's just part of the thing. If you want to resize and what have you, you've got resizing and scaling and all that kind of stuff. Okay, that's nice. I found this little control here. Remember, I do not RTFM. I deliberately do not RTFM. Even in some cases here, I did want to. They give you a help thing. If you hover over something, it will explain itself. I used those, but I deliberately did an RTFM. But you find this, it actually turns on this so that you can see the note that you're working on. Not a super fan of it, but it is interesting and it's there, so I turn it on and you can control your analyzer as to what you see. I always rather see post because that's what you're hearing. But different people want to see and hear different things. Okay, the main overview, and of course we can flick it into my whole world mode. Might be cool. I don't think I'd ever use it. Undo and what have you. Now we've got patches. As anyone knows, I am not a fan of patches, but in some ways for such a complex and in some ways slightly obtuse system, it does bear a certain amount of advantage to have some patches that say, okay, this is the sort of setup we would use to achieve this kind of thing. My car don't sound like that. So the ability to say, okay, in terms of when you really get into mixing, again, I'm going to be the don't, because it means you're not designing the space yourself. You're not really in control of the space. You're just going, oh, well, this sounds close, I'll use it, or because a professional gave it to me, but it's not what we do. Or you can say, oh, well, it's close, and now I'll just modify a few things. Okay, if you know what you're modifying and why you're modifying them, maybe. But please, you don't fully understand a reverb unit until you have started from and then gone, okay, now I'm going to make this sound like the space that this song wants. Not what I want because I'm an arrogant prick. What does the song need to shine? You know, what's the environment that it's in? If you want to know more about it, I made a whole series on reverbs talking about the real backstory understanding of how to create reverbs from scratch. Until you can do that, reverb will own you, and you will probably mismatch your reverb to what you're trying to do, which is a great way of looking unpro. Things that sound amazing, especially if they're using unusual, what we might call poor quality reverb units, are from a great understanding of how reverb works or how space works. That's what your Bob Clear Mountains are super at doing. The big knob is this one here, space and decay. This is actually not what you think it is. You think that's reverb length, but it turns out that it's not. What this is a set of preset reverb shapes or spaces. At least that's what they tell us. So, from a tiny box to a more than cavernous cathedral. So you can press the little buttons, or you can morph between. I'm not sure that I really feel a big sense of difference in space. I don't think they change the shape of that room a significant amount in there. But nonetheless, that's what that's designed for. It does give you this, okay, we've got this ever-expanding size of space. So there's probably several controls being controlled by the one. If you say, I like this space here, but geez, that's far too long, then you've got this, which is a new feature. So we can use the overall sense of the shape that they set up, and then finesse up to 4 times as long or a quarter. So it's a kind of an offset thing, so that's your length as opposed to your overall kind of how the shape is supposed to work. Interesting. Some people will really like that because it's like, oh, well, I don't need to know technical stuff. I am not technical as a general rule because I think it's pointless. But this I find, until I understand what it's doing, to me it's fudgy. So they're your probably main controls. Control-click will put things back to their default. Okay, so that's your first two. They're the main ones that you're going to use. We then have these characters. Modern is the existing algorithm that they had. There's Vintage, which is based around an older school style of reverb, early what have you. It sounds nice. So nothing for or against it either way. And then we have this plate. I'm going to say, while I have no idea what a real plate sounds like because I've never used one, I came in with, SPX 90 was the reverb unit in the studio where I was trained. So that was 86 or whatever. It was 88 when I started, so it was not new, but it was just affordable. I always felt that plates sounded a little different from this, a little bit more metallic. They say this is going to have that sound, but I don't hear it. To me, they all kind of sound the same, just a slightly different sense of shape. But whatever, 3 different flavors. They do have a different flavor, so if you're not getting it with one, then try another. Over time, you'll get used to the character of those flavors and say, okay, well, I like that as my starting point. In terms of, do I think they are significantly different from each other compared to, say, my quad reverb, which was about 1990. I don't feel like there's as big a difference in the algorithms here. They had chamber. You never see chambers anymore, plates and chambers and rooms and halls and stuff. And I felt like there was a big difference between them. Here I don't feel like there's a big difference. But there is a difference. It's just what it is. We've then got pre-delay. So pre-delay is exactly as you expect. Let's go really short. So you can have a gap between when the sound happens and when the reverb actually fires off. You can also lock it to sync, but why? I know you want me to show you. So that goes to the center, and then you can offset it slightly. To me, that just sounds awful. Like, why would we do that? I'm of the, let's tune this by feel. Which will be better this way. So that just allows you to create some space between the hit and the beginning of the reverb, which changes the feel in the room, but it also gives you more space within your mix, especially if you are mixing heavy like this. So you get a very definite sort of sound from doing that. These are really fudgy. These two in particular. Fudgy as in, you're going to RTFM, you're going to need to, and even there it's probably not going to explain anything that's useful. Character. I honestly don't feel like I hear much difference in the reverb. They tell me it's going to go from sparse to almost chorusy-like. I got nothing. I'm aware that it seems to be doing something, but I got nothing. Same with thickness. I'm aware something's happening. Exactly what it's doing, I don't know. And that makes me uncomfortable because I don't feel like I can control them. I can waggle them around and go, oh, maybe I prefer this over that. But that's not building a space, that's just it's playing. It's meddling. Not a fan of them. Distance is a similar one. It gives us the illusion of distance between us and the reverb sound. So it'll change a few parameters. Again, it's a fudgy one. I would far rather actually have control over the real parameters myself. I know it's going to give more knobs and buttons, but at the pro level, I want those. I actually want not an overwhelming number, but I actually want to be able to control these things myself, not have a fudgy, oh look, I'll do 20 things so you don't need to know what you're doing kind of a knob, because chances are the way they're handling those 20 things is not what I want. And at no point, despite their saying that this will get more sparse, am I ever able to get something that sounds or feels like the kind of reverb that I want, which is what makes it a no-go for me, simply because while it is actually very, very good technically in the smoothness and all this kind of stuff, to me it lacks versatility. Because I can't make it do the thing that I want it to do. It won't play in that arena. I understand, and that is a personal choice, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying be aware that the fudge buttons actually limit your ability. They do leave you with a, well, you'll only get the good settings. But good according to whom? To me, it only leaves the bad settings. See what my concern here with that is? They are fudgy, and you're just going to need to RTFM and play till you get a feel for how they work. It is a method, it is an approach, and I won't say I haven't used similar of that, because with reverb you can end up with a million parameters, and some of them become so small they're just not worth it. So yes, you do end up bundling things. Brightness. We can change the overall brightness of the space. So if we want to go darker, we want to go brighter. That one's really reasonably self-explanatory. Of course, we can double-click to type things in. Maybe if we go to plate and try that really bright. Still not what I'm used to. I'm not going to say it's bad, it's very smooth, just not what I'm used to. Width, so we can change our stereo width, that is good to have. The fact that it'll go over 100%, be careful, that's a good way to make yourself feel like you're making a wonderful mix and then making a mess. But the fact that you can actually narrow it down is good, because too wide a stereo can have a purpose, but you can just walk your own mix and not realize what's happening. We've got mix knob, which we can lock, and I'm not sure what we want that for, but we can do it. Nothing against it being there. It's one of those things that's potentially useful. I guess if you're doing something like at the end of the track and you want it to turn into a permanent reverb, rather than messing with the settings, you can just go flip the switch and the track ends with a forever. So cool. We've also got this ducking thing. So ducking, good to see they've used the proper term for it. If you don't know what ducking is, learn. It's misnamed side chaining. So it's using the input to duck the level of the reverb. So you can hear there where the snare comes in, it's actually pushing the reverb down. A little bit of ducking can be nice. If you feel like it's just a bit too wet overall, but pulling the mix down undoes the feel that you're after, ducking can be a cool thing. Don't feel that you need to use it. Don't use it until you understand the problem and realize that that could be a solution. Then we have auto gate. I don't understand why auto gate. There is some kind of, don't say AI, in here where it's working out the parameters of gating. Again, I sort of feel like, why can't I control that myself? But so it is. So we can change mostly how long that gate's going to run for. I just don't understand the auto bit, but again, no RTFM has been done. It's okay. Obviously, I'm feeding it a whole drum mix. Normally, we would not be gating like this unless we only had the snare. There is no solo button on here. No, there isn't. So there isn't an easy way to show you. But you get the idea, right? Your drums out separately, set your gate, set your length, and it's somehow magically working out what your settings are going to want to be. But they're not going to be the settings that I want. So again, it's like, yeah, thanks for actually taking away my ability to do the job. You might be like, oh, but it makes it faster. And it's like, no, the way that I choose to set something up is my art. The way that Bob Clearmountain chooses to set his thing up is his art. Saying, oh, but I need it to sound exactly like Bob Clearmountain means I either got to work out what Bob's did, or I have to go, well, I just need to work out how to get there myself. And the differences in how I've done it as opposed to Clearmountain's done it is the difference between Bob as an artist and Benedict as an artist. The idea that, oh, well, I just want it to be right means that you've got no idea what you're doing. And I know that pisses people off, but just think how much that mindset pisses off true professionals. Because not only is it gutting the industry, but people are sinking their own battleship by putting out poor quality work when they could have accessed and learned themselves, or accessed somebody who would have given them a piece of artwork as the mix for their song that would have been more likely to actually have people go, that's striking. Just as in the rise of Bob Clearmountain, people would have gone, listened to his mixes and gone, that's striking. Choose which way you want to go on that. Now, we've got these extra thingies in the middle here. We've got an EQ, which is just a pretty what you expect it to be sort of EQ. Like a lot of modern EQs, it's got this ability to sort of change its thing based upon how exciting we're getting with the EQ. Fair enough, I find it a little annoying, but it is what it is. We can change our settings here. So are we being aggressive? So it's a little bit of a mini FabFilter. So I can just wholesale alter the feel of my EQ. We can bypass a point, or we can kill a point. What we cannot do, that I can see, is bypass the EQ. I just think, guys, what are we doing? Why can't we have a little bypass it so that I can decide, was it better with it in or not? Obviously, with dramatic settings, we should be able to tell, but with less dramatic settings, it's not always so easy to tell. So seeing you have the facility to do little bypasses, why have we not got them on these features? So an overall post EQ. So we EQ the whole reverb space. Okay, cool. I don't know how many points we can have, but we can have plenty. We then got this one, which is the EQ that's within the feedback loop. So every time that goes around, it gets progressively more whatever we've done. Same mindset, we can choose various shapes. We can say I want my room to have a hole in it. You might think, why would we do that? But why not? It can be quite effective, especially if you've got a bit of a howl that's being generated for some reason. And you can say, well, this reverb's so great, it'll never create a howl, and you're probably correct. But nonetheless, the option's there. Cool. You can create some quite dramatic spaces by having gaps in them. Especially if you're doing something like this. I quite like that. It's very dramatic, very noticeable. Exactly what nobody wants. That's quite amusing. So you will see that if you're watching the fall off here, obviously the bit with the hole in the middle, it falls off really fast. It's not the same as just not there, which if we use this EQ to make a hole in the world, oh, this doesn't let me make a hole in the world. How disappointing. Fair enough. So if we'd made our hole in the world here, and let's just bypass this guy, you'll see that the reverb fall off's the same. We've just got the hole in what we're hearing, which is this one here. But if we turn this guy off and this guy back on, you can hear that it changes over time, just as this changes over time. This frequency, the 1800, builds up over time. So it starts to actually develop a little bit of a whine, which I quite like. So it blooms a little bit. That is a nice feature to have in a reverb. Common to get the post EQ, occasionally get a pre EQ, which with my kind of reverbs can be very useful for cutting out something so that it doesn't ring inside its clattery space. This is cool. I like it. I feel like perhaps it's a little bland, but again, they're trying to avoid us doing things that we're going to go, I don't like that. I want to get into the I don't like that to find things on the edge, the furry edge, the ragged edge, which are interesting. You know, the stuff that I grew up with in the late 70s and early 80s, you know, Bauhaus's Bela Lugosi's Dead, Undead, Undead, and all the rattling from the I assume it's a tape echo. That's ragged edge stuff. And where you've got a device that can only do safe things, good things, pro things, then we can't find those ragged edges, because that's where real art is made. But nonetheless, from what we have, apart from the fact of there being a global bypass, I think it is really pretty cool. So we can shape our reverbs and make something that we like. Bear in mind I'm in headphones, so I'd never do this in headphones. We now have a distinctive space. Yes, it's making that snare smack and whine, but I'm being dramatic. And I would be amused by that. I would use that in a piece far more than one of these safe sorts of things. But that is a Benedict approach. So I like that. I think that the decay alteration EQ thing, I think is actually a really nice thing. Now, the other thing that we can do in here is we can import, it says IR, and initially I was like, yeah, that's not going to be very interesting. But tried it. Okay, what can I do? Okay, let's choose that. That's actually a synth sound. And it goes, oh, yep, okay. And now we have this. Brilliant. Now, obviously, that was a synth sound and not an IR. It's interesting, in some of these, it will actually say to me, yeah, I don't think that's an IR. Like, warning, this does not appear to be an IR, so the result may be unexpected. It may sound like poop. Wonderful. I love it. It may sound like poop. Yes, you're right on that one. But the fact that we can create interesting spaces can we control that? Then I think they might give you more EQ points than we can actually control, which becomes a little bit, and there's something else that's appeared in here too. So you'd have to RTFM on, hang on, what's all this stuff? But it has the ability to take a WAV file. It's far more interesting than an IR. I know an IR is stored in a WAV file. But we have the ability to take a WAV file and then apply it and change it. Now, somebody asked me on another video about impulse responses and why I never really spoke about them, and I often speak about them in a rather dismissive sort of a way. I refer to them as being like bunny ears on an Instaham camera. They are a way of just overlaying this thing. While it's amusing to do the bunny ears on an Instaham camera, you can't actually say I am now a rabbit. I am not Bugs Bunny when I put on... It hasn't changed, it's just a thing that vaguely tries to follow me. Cute, funny, post it to friends and they laugh, probably at me. But the reality is, those things are static, which is why I use that example of the Instaham camera. What this does is it's a very, very cool answer to the convolution reverb by saying, yeah, we'll use time-honored resynthesis to actually work out how to make our synthesizer in here, because there's a reverb synthesizer, we'll use that to make our synthesizer in here give a very good algorithmic emulation of the thing that you've given us. In terms of comparing them, don't know, don't care. What I think is exciting with this is that it gives us the ability to step outside of the safe spaces that they've given us and pull in interesting spaces, things that we can turn into spaces. There was actually one, that one was designed as an IR. I think. Yeah, it was. But it didn't have a fade out. Why it was made the decisions like with this great big peak, I don't understand, because it was warm, white noise, pink noise kind of thing. But nonetheless, we have an interesting space that's come out of that. So it's kind of like a random button, but a lot more controlled, and I think is a bit of fun. And I think that if I don't know, maybe I do have this, I don't know how long this license lasts for, but in terms of, because there's a convolution in the Reason RV7000, which I just don't dig and I don't use, but if I were thinking I might want to convolute or something like that, I want to impart some of this, then I would grab this for that. That to me is actually the killer feature of this. The lack of ability to pull it back into a Benedict-style reverb, well, I don't always want everything to clatter as much as you might think, but I think this is a really, really cool thing. My final words here are that you have to understand and not fall for the this is the most pro reverb, especially seeing it's got the name on it, or that there's only one good reverb. There are lots of different ways, as you heard from the ABCD with 4 different types of units. Each one has its charms and its strengths, and a lot of that ultimately comes down to it being a very personal choice. What we have here is a very clean and a very safe reverb space. As we pointed out, I think they may even have pointed out that you've got the safety of every option that you choose being a good one, a safe one. That is a liability to me, but for most people, I guess that's exactly what they want. They want the Toyota Corolla of reverbs, and this is that. It is very smooth, and that's what most people want. It's not the false, slightly odd smoothness of, say, Valhalla, where you get the delay unit. I reviewed it, you get the delay unit, and you pile on the diffusion, and it becomes, whoa! I mean, that's amazing. It's dramatic because it is like, it's outside of the real world. This, I don't know what approximates a real world space they say this does. It gives the illusion of it, and as mix engineers, that's what we're after. So it's very good for that kind of thing. It is a very impressive reverb. To me, it lacks the kind of control that I would want. It lacks the kind of versatility that I would want. But again, the other side is that most people don't want that control. They don't want to find themselves in a space where they're like, oh, I don't know why it sounds as bad as it does, because they are busy trying to get one result. This is well balanced to give only the safe results. And that to many people is going to be the thing that they like about it the best. There is no sense of BS about this, which is good. You know that I'm very anti-BS because a professional product should have no BS about it. You can have some quirky features. I consider the Wave import here a quirky feature, but it's a cool quirky feature. 90% of the time it might be a bit stupid and useless, but there'll be those points where you bring something in and you go, that's cool, I wouldn't have made that. In which case, it's cool. Putting a random button would have been a quirky BS feature. Putting in this ability to import and resynthesize what we're hearing out of the Wav file. So in theory, I haven't tried it, in theory we could probably import a whole piece of music. Import Motorhead's Ace of Spades and turn it into our reverb spade. What's going to happen? I don't know. I mean, it may have a limit as to how long. It may say, dude, you're not going to have a 3.5 minute reverb here. We can't track it all the way through. I think it must be averaging. But nonetheless, it is a cool feature that's done in a professional and a classy manner. That lack of the other stuff that they've got, those LFOs and what have you, possibly as a liability in that kind of market, the cable guys kind of market, but FabFilter may be very deliberately saying we're going to stay out of that market because it's a different environment. And I should imagine the Bob Clear Mountains of the world, while they might go, oh, that's interesting, it's clutter and probably going to be in the way. I don't know. I can only guess. I can only go on my personal opinion. I wouldn't have been opposed to it being there so long as it doesn't get in the way. The fact that it's not there means it absolutely doesn't get in the way. And so long as these respond to automation, then you can do all that stuff yourself anyway. Everything's got so much modulation option these days. If you can't work out how to do it or think about, oh, I can do that, and this is what my song needs. If only I could modulate the wet dry or the, then if you're not thinking of those things, then you're not ready to do them. So bottom line, very impressive piece of equipment in its own way. I think very fairly priced for what it is. You do need, however, to take the time to work out if it suits what you're looking for. And please don't do that as being, well, it's got the word pro in it and everyone says it's the best. Whether they do or not, I don't know. But that's not your criteria. It should never be your criteria. Your criteria should be, what do my pieces need? What's my style? What's the thing that I like to impart on the music that I work with? If it's this sound, brilliant. This is a really good piece of kit. If you're after something that's a little different, then find something that gives you that. If you're after more of a 70s sort of a feel, then why not start with something like Multiplier? Because it's going to give you a feel which is quite different from. That said, there's absolutely nothing to stop you from saying, okay, I'll get some of the feel from this and some of the feel from Multiplier. I do that. I will put a couple of reverbs onto something, either side by side or one feeding into the other. And balance that character, maybe force them together with a little bit of compression or something like that. And that way I've made the space that I want for this piece to be in, what I feel the piece needs to be in to tell its story. That's the important bit. In terms of is it good? Yeah, it's very good. My only real negatives are just that, yeah, these controls are a little fudgy for my liking, and the fact that we don't have ABs on these EQs. Total AB on them. I don't know how they didn't even think of that, to be able to just, we can do it on each individual point, but we can't do it up here unless I'm really missing something. But overall, get out there, try it yourself. It does seem to be a classy piece of kit, as the FabFilter stuff always is. My name again is Benedict for Higher Hertz. There's higherhertz.com, different stream of information. I'm not the only reviewer or the only kind of stuff that we do, so have a look around. You may find something else that appeals to you as well. If you have any questions about the program, please have watched the program first, then down below, preferably after hitting subscribe, please explain your question carefully so that I can give a careful answer. Most importantly, get out there, have fun, you have a great day.